Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
He'll make her feel like she needs to apologise for something that he did, even though she has done absolutely nothing wrong. He'll tell her that her motivations are one way, even though her intentions were never that. He'll make her feel like she's almost a little bit crazy.
God designed marriage and the family to be a deeply loving and tender relationship and to be the foundation of a healthy society. Unfortunately, we hear and see every day the heartbreaking stories of when it goes wrong. We're talking about family violence. Joining us today is psychologist and the Safe Ministries manager of CityLife Community Care, Christine Souza. She'll be unpacking this complex issue and how we as individuals and the church can be better informed to support those involved. It may also be helpful to those currently experiencing. That's Christine Souza with myself, Brett Ryan, for Focus on the Family, Australia. Due to the subject matter, parents, we want to give a little ears warning. Well, this is one of those interviews that is going to break many people's hearts, but it is such an important one to address, and everyone should be better informed. Well, thanks, Christine, for joining us. Well, tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Yep. So my background is in psychology and I practice community psychology. At the moment, I am in a role called Safe Ministries Manager, where I look at creating safe places and safe ministries across CityLife. We talk about family violence, we talk about suicide intervention, we talk about child protection, and a number of issues where people are at risk, and we aim to bring safety into their lives.
And as a community psychologist, it accommodates lots of different areas.
Absolutely.
And one of those areas is family violence.
Yes.
And we must acknowledge that family violence does go both ways, but unfortunately, usually it's men perpetrating harsh, unloving actions towards women and men. Yeah. And so let's start there. What is family violence?
Yeah. So family violence is a pattern of violent, threatening, coercive or demeaning behaviours used within a family or family-like relationships to control, dominate and cause a person to live in fear. It is in fact a human rights violation, and in some cases it's a crime, so like with physical and sexual violence, and really it is unacceptable in any form. Yep.
But a lot of people, when they hear the word violence, they go straight to physical violence.
Absolutely.
But it's that fear aspect, isn't it? So whenever anyone is feeling unsafe, and that could be the whole variety of, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, anything else?
Yes, there's emotional abuse, social abuse, economic abuse, there's sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, there's stalking, separation violence, and spousal domestic homicide. So it really goes through this
extreme, doesn't it?
It really does go to the extreme. And as you said, fear is the common factor in family violence. So some people say to me, we were just having an argument. And yeah, sometimes he yells. My question is, are you scared? Are you scared for your life? Are you scared for the life of your children? That's where we're going from quite, dysfunctional to right up the continuum, the pointy end of you're now in an abusive relationship. And so the Family Violence Act of 2008 is very clear that family violence includes much more than just physical violence.
Which is, for many of our listeners, they may have never put the two and two together, that it's not physically violent, but there's other aspects of family violence.
Absolutely. I mean, once upon a time, that's exactly what people thought. It has to be just hitting. Has he actually hit you? So if a female came forward and was talking about some of the things that were going on in her marriage, where she has no control over her finances, he's extremely controlling. He isolates her from the rest of her family. He demeans her. He controls every aspect of her life. The question is, yes, but he's not hitting you. So what are you complaining about? And that's just so out of date.
Yeah.
And it does not at all in any way acknowledge that this person is in an incredibly dysfunctional and abusive relationship.
So why do people do it? I mean, obviously, as a man, we're actually the ones the most obvious that we do this. But why do men do this to women?
All right. So in the past, people would attribute family violence to maybe, the guy's just got a really bad temper. Maybe he's been drinking. He's unemployed. He's depressed. He's just had a bad day. Maybe his wife didn't cook him a good meal. Just really ridiculous and shocking.
Not meeting his needs.
Not meeting his needs. They're all ridiculous suggestions, but really there's never an excuse for violence. So what makes a person do this? So there's been some research that has been done on the characteristics of an abuser. So there's no sort of typical family violence perpetrator, but there are definitely some common factors. So abusers are generally not sick or deranged individuals, but they have been socialised to believe that violence and abuse is okay and can be used to get what they want.
So it's been normalised. Yeah. And whether they've been brought up in a household that their father did this to their mother or their grandfather or their uncle and auntie, or whether their mother used to do the same thing, all these type of things that is normalised. So they're actually saying, hey, I've always seen it, so what was wrong with it then? So why isn't it wrong now?
Yeah, that's right. So it's basically they've learnt these behaviours. They are learnt behaviours and they use those learnt behaviours to get what they want. Some other characteristics are they generally have poor self-esteem, poor communication skills. They can be quite emotionally immature.
That's that power struggle, isn't it? Because I'm feeling low.
Yep.
I need to put my power over another person.
Yep, that's right. And interestingly, they actually have quite a dependency on their wife. So their sense of self is really tied to that woman that they are married to. And so therefore there is this need to control that person because their sense of identity, who they are, is tied to that person. Earlier we talked about, the physical violence. Often abusers will never show this behaviour in public. So that excuse of, have they got a bad temper? Are they violent? It has nothing to do with why they're doing it. If they can control themselves in public, they can control themselves behind closed doors at home.
Well,
but they
that's
choose
interesting.
not to.
You're saying that these people actually have sort of two personalities or two identities.
Yep.
One is the one in private with their partner, and the other is maybe the charismatic, likeable larrikin. Everyone likes him. So there's this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of thing.
That's exactly right. And that's what a lot of abused individuals will say. It's like they have a Jekyll and Hyde personality.
You mentioned the word manipulation, and I've heard this word called gaslighting.
Yes, yeah.
Can you explain to our audience what gaslighting is?
So gaslighting is another technique that's used by abusers. So it involves lying and maybe misconstruing things that make her question her memory, her perception and her sense of reality. So, for instance, he'll make her feel like she needs to apologise for something that he did, even though she has done absolutely nothing wrong. He'll tell her that her motivations are one way, even though her intentions were never that. He'll make her feel like she's almost a little bit crazy, that she's not making any sense. And if she doesn't agree with what his beliefs and opinions are, there's something wrong with her. So it's a really insidious form of psychological and emotional abuse that tears away at her confidence and causes her to question herself. Her responses to this are often questions like, am I actually the crazy one here? Am I the one who's really causing all of this? Maybe he's right after all.
They start second-guessing themselves. Yeah. It's a bit of mind games, isn't it?
And
I've read this, that there was some keys and they used to hide the keys and then put the keys back. And then the woman would be saying, I just looked there. And they'd be making him feel like they really are going crazy.
Yep.
Just all this manipulation to start doubting themselves.
Yeah, and to create a dependency on him and that he's right and that she can't do anything without him.
there's so much in that alone that these little things, these mind games that people are doing has to change people's thinking and perceptions, because they have these two personalities and people don't believe them and they might start doubting them. And so if they did share it with another safe person or someone in authority, they go, well, I can't believe you. I don't believe you. So then they don't share it.
Absolutely. And that's part of my role, is to bring about this sort of awareness and education on what family violence actually looks like, what people are and have been suffering with for years behind closed doors, and teaching people how to be safe people. Now, whether you believe it or not, the reality is that this is happening in families, and it isn't a surprise when someone who you least expect comes forward and says, actually, this is what I've been suffering with behind the scenes. So my role is to help people to say, well, actually, that sounds like it's quite plausible. It is part of family violence to have this hidden so well behind the scenes. And so, yes, I do believe you. And okay, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
How do we actually help
This
you?
is so good. And this is what we're educating our audience today.
Yes.
That's Christine Souza, psychologist and the Safe Ministries manager of CityLife Community Care.
The Word for Today is Australia's most widely read daily devotional, designed to give you practical teaching to keep you focused on your relationship with Jesus. Read it online or subscribe to the free printed edition at thewordfortoday.com.au.
Well, welcome back. We have a number of helpful articles and resources on this topic on family violence and mental health on our website. Please go to families.org.au. That's families.org.au. So why are people reluctant to go and tell somebody? What's going through people's minds?
Yep. So the main thing is that they're not going to be believed. The other thing is there's a whole lot of things going on in their mind around shame and guilt and embarrassment. There could be cultural factors that are impacting on their decision to come forward. The idea of saving face, not to bring
like
shame.
Like a Chinese culture would be very much like to save face, because we don't talk about these type of things. It's all behind closed doors.
That's right. To protect the family, to not bring embarrassment and shame onto the family. In some cultures, if there's a problem in your marriage, you are literally affecting the marriages of your siblings. So, for example, in an Indian culture, if there is arranged marriage, so if one marriage is falling apart and the other family comes to know that that family has got issues, suddenly that family doesn't look so appealing for their child to marry into.
Tainted by association.
Tainted by association. And if there is such a thing as still going on with dowries, suddenly the dowry doesn't need to be so high, because the reputation of that family is now tainted. And so when you leave your marriage, you're affecting your siblings' chances of marrying into a good family.
And Australia is such a multicultural nation. We have to be very aware that this is going on. And a lot of people also maybe fear of they may take the children, so I'll lose contact with my children. Financially, they might feel that they can't survive on their own. Their security is where they live, and their identity is very much on being a wife, a mother, someone who is esteemed in their community, whatever it is. So all those things can actually affect somebody leaving. Have you seen this in your clinical experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very big issue for females who especially have given up their careers to look after their children, so they don't have a direct income, or if they do, it's not as high, and so it's quite difficult for them to support themselves financially. The other thing that's really interesting is this idea that he's going to change. They're hanging out for when he's going to change, because he keeps promising to change. So there's this thing called the cycle of violence. So in that cycle of violence, just in a nutshell, it really goes from, the explosion, which is the abusive attack. Then there's a remorse phase, and there's almost like a honeymoon phase where he comes back and he's sorry and he has reasons and he has justifications in his mind why he did it, and he apologizes, and then he woos her back into a sense of safety and comfort. And she loves him. She still loves him. This is not a stranger doing this to her. This is the love of her life. This is the person that she chose to spend the rest of her life with. And so there is this push and pull tug of, I believe you, but I don't want to be in this, and I'm scared of you, but I do love you, and I love it when you're like this, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make you stay like this. But she'll never be able to do enough to keep him to stay.
That's because it keeps on coming back.
And then it goes back. Something triggers, something happens, and then it explodes again. This cycle can go on and on. It could be as quick as every week to could take months before it comes back around. It could take years even. But it will keep happening, and she will keep believing that he's going to change, and she will keep hoping that he's going to change.
Because I guess that hope aspect is that because you go into a marriage and you go, I want this to be forever. I want it to be till death do us part, in sickness and in health.
Absolutely.
And so it's holding on to that dream, and the dream has been shattered.
Absolutely.
And then there's a little glimmer of hope again, and then the shattered again. And it keeps on this cycle. And because many people would say, well, you know, if my husband did that to me, or if my wife did that to me, I'd be out of there, you know, like, but people don't understand that their heart is involved, it's well and truly engaged, and sometimes the brain, I guess, disengages for a while because it's hoping that things will get better.
I think it's such a confusing state to be in when the person that you love is treating you and your children this way. I think the reasons for people staying and leaving are really complex, and they are individual to that person. It all really depends on where they're at with their ability to walk away. Now, another factor is the children wanting to stay because they actually think it's going to be better for the children.
Yeah.
At the same time, that can also be...
Because he might be a good father as well. He might be loving towards them.
Maybe, yeah.
But I've also read that when a child has been brought up in a volatile environment, it's a form of child abuse.
Absolutely, it's a form of child abuse. There's no doubt that family violence is a form of child abuse.
How does that work? How does it work that is, you know, because I was saying that the child is, you know, he's not getting or she's not getting harmed physically, but they're witnessing this terrible verbal abuse or emotional abuse or whatever we've actually said before.
Absolutely.
And they're actually witness to this, and it's a form of child abuse.
Yep. So I'm going to cut to the chase on this. Exposure to family violence is a form of child abuse. It is a form of psychological child abuse if a child hears or witnesses violence directed towards their mother or sibling, even if the child is not the victim. So if you're abusing your wife and your children know about it, your children are being abused too.
Wow.
Yep. So exposure to violence against their mom or caregivers or even siblings has a profoundly detrimental effect on children. It affects a child's behavioural, cognitive, social and emotional development. It impacts their attitude to what is acceptable in relationships. It normalises violence.
And so that's when that perpetual cycle, if they're being brought up and seeing it and witnessing it, it's not too far to stray from the imagination that they will then in turn do it to their future relationships because they've seen it. This has been normalised.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a trend. Not everybody will do that, but definitely it puts you at a higher probability of doing that.
Yeah.
I think the heartbreaking thing is when you think about these little ones and all a child wants to do is feel safe. That's it. You know, as a parent, our duty is to love and make our children feel safe.
Yeah.
And the heartbreaking thing for me is that when a child is witnessing any form of family violence and they are witnessing this tension and terrible relationship between their parents, their sense of safety becomes quite warped.
Yeah.
Like there becomes this inner tension of what is actually safe, an ambivalence of safe goes together with fear. How does that even work? How does a child negotiate that in their emotions and in their mind? It's just heartbreaking. So family violence and child abuse certainly go together. There's an interrelationship there that we cannot ignore.
And we have to just acknowledge, and I know it seems to be repeating ourselves, but, we always have this idea of family violence. It has to be physical, but words really do a lot of damage as well. And, anger and frustration and taking it out on others.
Yep.
If your children are witnessing this, it is that form of abuse that's happening to them, and they wouldn't be completely in denial. I said, I haven't done anything to my kids, but yet they're witnessing to that psychological.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If mum's being called all sorts of names, terrible names, or she is being treated like, one client told me her husband treated her like a dog. She had to sleep on the floor next to him on a mat like a dog, and he would call her that. And all the children knew. So it's really interesting, this tug of war with the children. So there is that aspect of, I want to keep the marriage together because I think that's going to be better for the children. And yet on the other hand, that is usually the breaking point for most women. When the kids come along and they start to see that the children are understanding what's happening to them, and the children are now not thriving as much as they should be, that's usually the breaking point for a woman, because it takes up to 7 or 8 times before a woman actually successfully leaves the relationship. It is so complex. It's very difficult for a woman to leave. It is not straightforward the way that people think that it is. As you said earlier, well, if my husband did that to me, then I'll be out of there. No, you wouldn't. It's not that straightforward.
Again, that throws you out. Yeah. The idea of people would say, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave? No. It is so much more complex.
It is. And that's where we have to learn to be so much more compassionate and caring and understanding of where a woman is at in that process of whether she wants to leave or whether she has found a way to make it work, and be non-judgmental. So just to stand by her and support her, believe her, and accept where she's at, and do whatever it takes to help her to find her safe path.
Yeah. When you said we, it's everyone's responsibility to have a greater understanding and to come alongside them to be their support during this phase, because it's very confusing, very complex, as you've said.
Absolutely.
And they're worried about how they're going to live, how they're going to function, and they've got their children. So let's go back a little bit more about how this family violence affects children. How does it affect them individually? They're in an environment that is not safe, doesn't feel secure, but yet how else is it impacting a child?
Yeah. So children who witness regular acts of violence can have greater emotional and behavioural problems than other children. So even really young children can be profoundly frightened and affected. Contrary to popular belief, witnessing episodes of violence between people they love can affect young children as much as if they were the victims of the violence.
Really?
Yeah. And some of the things that kids go through is they blame themselves for the violence. They think that if they could do something different, mum and dad would be happier. If only they hadn't have gotten in the way, maybe if they had done the dishes and daddy wouldn't get angry and he wouldn't hurt mummy. So they really
It's like a child who's with their parents divorced. They feel like it's the blame. It's irrational, but through their mind, they have this narrative that actually put the blame on themselves.
Absolutely. It's quite traumatic for children. Sometimes they have sleeping difficulties. They often have nightmares. Some children will even regress to an earlier stage of development, so they might start thumb sucking again or bedwetting. They are generally quite anxious and fearful. They can also go the other way and display quite aggressive and destructive behaviour, so that might come out in the schoolyard. So where they're not able to do that at home, they will let out those emotions outside
They might become the bully themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They could withdraw from people and events. They could show signs of depression. Yeah, so they could have stress-related illnesses such as headaches and stomach aches all of a sudden, feeling, they've got those sort of psychosomatic symptoms that are coming through. They may have speech difficulties. They could start stuttering. There's a whole lot of effects on a small child.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be a small child. It can be teenagers as well.
In teenagers, it will usually come out with a lot of self-hating behaviours, self-harming and aggressive behaviours if they've been witnessing it since they were young.
We are only just scratching the surface.
We are.
Would you join us again for another chat about how we can deal with this important issue?
Absolutely. I'd be really pleased to do that.
Well, thanks again for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Well, marriage and family is meant to be a reflection of who God is and how much He loves us and cares for us. But as we've discussed today, we live in a world that is marred by sin, and as a result, some people will do and say terrible things to the very people that they should be loving and protecting the most. If you are currently experiencing violence and you and your children feel unsafe, we would encourage you to seek professional help. And if we can be of any service to you, please do not hesitate contacting us here at Focus on 1300 300 361 or at response@families.org.au. Thanks for joining us today. We hope this may be a start of some healthy conversations about how you can help others and have a greater understanding and be greater support to those experiencing this uninvited and unwarranted behaviour. We look forward to you tuning in again for another edition of Focus on the Family, Australia.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.